Claire Blake, daughter of New York's most feared mafia boss, never slept with the lights off. No one dared to ask why. Until Emily, the new maid, overheard something she wasn't supposed to, and a single whisper triggered a chain of events no one could stop. Now Emily is trapped at the heart of a quiet war, where old secrets, blood-bound pacts, and constant surveillance decide who lives and who disappears. Before you begin, click subscribe and tell me something about where you live. What's the weather like today? Claire Blake was the only daughter of Richard Blake, one of the most feared and respected figures in the world of organized crime. Growing up, Claire never lacked anything. The Blake mansion was massive, filled with expensive furniture, security guards, and servants who followed strict rules. However, even with all the comfort, there was something strange about Claire. Since she was a child, she had a rule that everyone in the house had to follow. The lights in her room could never be turned off, not even for a second. No one ever questioned it directly, not even her father. Some thought it was a leftover fear from childhood, while others believed she had a medical condition. Still, no one dared to test it. Claire herself never explained why. She just made sure that the room stayed lit all night, every night. The rule wasn't optional, and everyone around her followed it without asking questions. That night, the mansion had a new face, Emily Harper. Emily had just been hired as a maid and was still getting used to the place. It was her third day working there, and she was still trying to understand how things worked in such a strange and secretive household. She was cleaning the hallway on the second floor, where Claire's room was located. Everything was quiet until she overheard two of the mansion's security guards talking in low voices. They didn't see her nearby and continued their conversation. One of them said, "You know the rule, right? If she turns off the light, he appears." The other guard nodded and looked nervous. Emily didn't understand what they meant. Who was he? Was it a joke? A threat? She kept those questions in her mind but didn't say anything. Something about the way the guards spoke gave her chills. They weren't joking. Whatever they were talking about, they believed it was real. Emily continued her work, but now she was more alert. She couldn't stop thinking about what she heard. As the night got darker, she decided to stay close to Claire's room. She told herself it was just to make sure everything was clean, but the truth was, she was curious. There was something strange happening in that house, and she wanted to understand it. She stood near the door quietly, pretending to fix a painting on the wall. Inside the room, Claire was getting ready for bed. The light from the small lamp on the nightstand was still on. Emily watched as Claire reached for the switch. Her hand hovered above it, unsure. In that moment, something inside Emily pushed her to speak. She wasn't thinking clearly. She just said it, in a soft voice, barely above a whisper. "Don't do it." Claire froze. Her hand stopped. For a few seconds, there was complete silence. Claire turned her head slowly, looking towards the door, but didn't say anything. Emily felt her heart beating fast. She thought she might get fired or worse. But instead of yelling or calling for help, Claire simply lowered her hand and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the lamp. Emily didn't know what had just happened, but she felt like she had just crossed a line. From that point forward, things were different. Claire didn't ask who had spoken. She didn't seem surprised. It was as if she had been expecting it. Emily walked away quietly, but her mind was spinning. What had she just stopped? What was going to happen if that light had been turned off? That night, she didn't sleep. Something told her that she had just become part of something much bigger than she understood. In the days that followed, Emily noticed things she hadn't seen before. There were areas of the mansion that no one entered. Certain doors were always locked. At night, strange sounds echoed through the hallways, but when she asked others, they pretended not to hear anything. Claire began to speak to Emily more often, but only in private. She never mentioned the lamp incident, but she looked at Emily differently now, like someone who knew a secret. Emily realized that her warning, that one simple phrase, had changed something, not just between her and Claire, but in the house itself. The atmosphere was heavier. Even the guards looked more serious. They didn't joke anymore. Whatever danger they had hinted at, it was real. And Emily had unknowingly stepped into the center of it. It didn't take long for Emily to realize that there were rules in the Blake mansion that went beyond ordinary life. Light was not just for comfort, it was protection. Darkness wasn't just the absence of light, it was an invitation. Emily began to understand that there were things hidden in the shadows, things that were not human, and Claire, for some reason, was their target, or maybe their gate. Every time Emily passed by Claire's room, she made sure the lamp was on. She even began carrying a flashlight at night. She didn't understand everything, but she knew enough to be afraid. The mansion, so beautiful during the day, turned into something else after sunset. Emily wasn't just a maid anymore. She was now a witness, and possibly a player in a dangerous game of survival, where the rules were written in silence and fear. After the night Emily stopped Claire from turning off the light, things changed in the mansion. The next morning, Emily walked through the hallways and immediately noticed the way people looked at her. The security guards, who had barely noticed her before, now followed her with their eyes as she passed. They didn't say anything, but their expressions had changed. Some looked surprised. Others looked annoyed, even angry. Near the main entrance, Tom Grayson, the man who acted as Richard Blake's personal advisor, stood speaking quietly with two of the guards. As Emily walked by, he stopped talking and stared at her. She tried to act normal and kept walking, but she felt the tension. It was clear now they knew she had interfered. Later that afternoon, while passing through the garden, she heard two men talking near the fountain. One said, "The new one heard too much." The other one just nodded without saying anything. Emily tried to focus on her work, but she couldn't stop thinking about those words. That evening, while cleaning one of the guest bathrooms, her phone buzzed inside her apron pocket. She wasn't supposed to check it while working, but something told her to look. It was an anonymous message. "Keep your mouth shut, or we'll shut it for you." She froze. Her hands started to shake. A few seconds later, another message came in. "You weren't supposed to be there." Emily locked the phone and put it away quickly, but she couldn't breathe right. She wasn't sure who had sent the messages, but they clearly wanted her gone. Someone had seen her that night. Someone knew she was listening when she shouldn't have been. That moment made everything real. She wasn't just a curious maid anymore. She had seen something, stopped something. And now she had become a problem for someone. Emily stayed quiet for the rest of the day, avoiding people as much as she could. She didn't tell anyone about the messages. Part of her was scared of getting fired, but a bigger part was afraid of what might happen if she talked to the wrong person. That night, Tom Grayson sat in Richard Blake's office. The room was dark, except for a small desk lamp. Tom looked serious. "She didn't just act on instinct," he said. "What if she's part of something bigger? What if someone sent her?" Richard leaned back in his chair, thinking. He didn't answer right away. He just tapped his fingers on the desk. Tom continued, "You built this house to protect your daughter from something no one else understands. But now we have an outsider involved. That changes things." Richard finally nodded and said, "Keep an eye on her, but don't move yet." Tom agreed, but he didn't look comfortable with the decision. Meanwhile, Claire had started behaving differently. Since that night, she began talking to Emily more often. She asked her to bring tea personally instead of letting the other staff do it. She invited her to sit for a few minutes while she talked about her day. Emily was confused by the sudden attention, but she didn't resist. There was something strange about Claire's behavior. It wasn't just kindness, it was trust. Claire told Emily that most people in the house only did what they were paid to do. They followed orders. But Emily had done something different. She had acted without expecting anything in return. "You didn't know what would happen," Claire said one afternoon, "but you still stopped me." Emily didn't know how to respond. All she could say was, "I just had a feeling." Claire nodded and said nothing more, but from then on she stayed close to Emily, as if Emily's presence made her feel safer. Outside the mansion, far from the main house, there was an old garage that had not been used in years. Most of the staff didn't go near it. That night the lights inside the garage were on. 3 men stood around a table, wearing dark clothes and ski masks. One of them was cleaning a rifle. Another adjusted a black duffel bag filled with ammunition. The third man spoke, his voice calm. "She's going to turn off the light tonight," he said, "and when she does, we'll know what she saw." The others nodded in silence. Everything was ready. They had waited long enough. The masked men weren't part of the regular staff. They had no names, no records in the house, but someone had brought them in for a reason. They had a job: watch Claire, wait for the signal, and act the moment the light went off. It was all planned. All they needed was darkness. Back in the mansion, Emily didn't sleep that night. She sat in her room, fully dressed, with her phone in hand and a flashlight beside her. She didn't know what to do. If she left, it might look suspicious. If she stayed, she didn't know who she could trust. Claire had sent her a message earlier, asking her to come to her room before bedtime. Emily hadn't answered yet. She felt like she was being pulled in 2 directions. Go and protect Claire, or stay away and protect herself. But deep down, she knew she had already made her choice. She stood up, took the flashlight and left the room. In the hallway, everything was quiet, too quiet. As she reached Claire's door, she noticed it was slightly open. From inside, she saw Claire reaching for the lamp again, her fingers close to the switch. Emily stepped forward and said firmly, "Don't." But this time, no one was sure if it would be enough. Emily was called into the reading room late in the afternoon. The message had come from one of the staff, short and serious. "Mr. Blake wants to see you. Now." She felt her stomach turn. She had barely spoken to Richard Blake since she arrived, and now he was asking for her directly. As she stepped into the reading room, she saw him sitting in a large armchair near the fireplace. He didn't smile. He didn't offer her a seat. "Why did you stop my daughter from turning off the light?" he asked plainly. Emily hesitated. Then she told him everything, about the guards whispering the strange messages and her instinct that something was wrong. Richard listened quietly, his face calm but unreadable. He opened his mouth to speak again, but before he could say a word, the entire house went dark. The lights flickered once and cut out completely. At the same moment, glass shattered somewhere upstairs. There was yelling in the distance, heavy footsteps, more crashing. Then the unmistakable sound of gunfire. Richard stood immediately and moved toward the wall beside the fireplace. "Stay close to me," he ordered. Emily froze, but followed. Claire's scream came from the second floor, sharp and terrified. Emily turned toward the door, but Richard grabbed her arm. "We get her, then we move." Without wasting time, he pulled open a narrow panel behind a bookshelf and led Emily through a hidden hallway that twisted behind the walls of the house. They reached the stairs just as Claire came running down, her face pale. 2 masked men were chasing her, but Richard fired twice from a small gun hidden in his jacket. The men dropped. "Let's go!" he shouted. Holding both women by the wrist, he led them toward the large fireplace in the reading room, where a second secret panel had opened behind the logs. Behind the fireplace was a narrow stone tunnel. Richard helped them through quickly and shut the entrance behind them. Everything was dark, except for the small emergency flashlight he carried. They moved carefully, following the path that led deep underground. Emily kept looking over her shoulder, still shaken by the sounds above. Claire didn't speak. She just held onto Emily's hand tightly. After a few minutes, they reached an old metal door. Richard opened it, revealing a cold, abandoned bunker beneath the mansion. Dust covered the walls, but the air was still. "We'll stay here," he said. "For now." Emily looked around. The room had old chairs, shelves with supplies, and a broken desk in the corner. It was clear no one had been there in years. She turned to Richard. "Why would someone attack us like this?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he checked the pistol in his hand and said, "They didn't come for me. They came for Claire." "Why would anyone want to hurt her?" she asked. Claire sat in one of the chairs, hugging her knees. Richard finally explained, "Years ago I made enemies. I took things from people, things that should have never existed, secrets buried in this house. Claire, she's connected to all of it." Emily couldn't believe what she was hearing. She looked at Claire, who stayed silent. "And me?" Emily asked. "Why the threats? Why the messages?" Richard looked at her carefully. "You saw something you weren't supposed to. The moment you opened your mouth, you put yourself in the middle." Footsteps echoed from above. Someone was walking through the main floor, slow and steady. Richard turned off the flashlight. "They're looking for us," he whispered. Emily held her breath. The silence was thick. Claire reached for Emily's hand again. Even in the dark, they could all feel the danger getting closer. More footsteps came. This time, closer. Heavy boots thudded across the floor above their heads. Dust fell from the ceiling as someone walked directly above the bunker. The three of them stayed completely still. Richard motioned for silence, holding one finger to his lips. They listened. The steps moved slowly, back and forth, like the person was searching. Then silence. A door creaked somewhere above. Emily didn't know if the attacker had left or was just waiting. The fear was constant now. Every little sound felt dangerous. Richard placed his gun on his lap and leaned forward. "This house was supposed to keep her safe," he said quietly, "but now we've been pulled into something deeper. They don't just want her gone. They want what she knows. And if they think you know too, then they'll never stop." Emily didn't respond. Neither did Claire. All they could do was wait in the dark and hope it held them long enough. Suddenly, a soft creak came from the hidden staircase they used earlier. Someone had found the passage. Claire gasped. Emily grabbed her shoulder, trying to stay calm. Richard stood and aimed his gun at the bunker door. They all stared at the entrance, waiting for it to swing open. But it didn't. Instead, the footsteps stopped again. Complete silence. Then, Richard turned slowly and looked at both of them. He moved closer, keeping his voice low. "If anything happens to me," he said, "you two stay together. Don't leave this room until morning, no matter what." Claire's eyes were wide. Emily nodded. Richard moved back to the door and waited. Another moment passed. Still nothing. Finally, he looked back at them one last time and said, "We're in the dark now, but with me you survive." And with that, he stood guard, ready for whatever came next. Days had passed since the attack on the Blake mansion. Emily and Claire were now staying in a completely different place, a secure estate located on the outskirts of Westchester. It looked peaceful from the outside, with a clean garden, trimmed trees, and a calm driveway. But the inside told a different story. There were security cameras on every wall. Guards walked the grounds in teams, day and night, with radios clipped to their shoulders. The windows had reinforced glass, and the gates were tall and covered in motion sensors. Emily noticed that even the air vents had security seals. She had no access to a phone, the internet, or the outside world. She wasn't free to leave the house without permission. At first, she thought it was for protection, but after a few days she understood the truth. This wasn't just about safety. It was a cage, not for Claire, but for her. A golden prison. Emily sat in one of the estate's living rooms when Richard Blake arrived. He didn't waste time. He sat across from her, looked her straight in the eyes and said, "Claire saw something that night, something important. But you understood it." Emily didn't know how to respond. She still didn't know exactly what she had seen, just the tension in the house, the fear in everyone's eyes, and the feeling that something worse was hiding behind all of it. Richard continued, "You saw the pattern. You reacted without needing instructions. That's why you're not just the maid anymore." His words felt heavy. Emily realized she was being pulled deeper into something she didn't fully understand. And now, there was no going back. She wasn't just someone who got in the way. She was a part of the plan, a piece in a much bigger game. Whether she liked it or not, her role had changed. A few days later, Tom Grayson called a meeting in one of the estate's side offices. He laid out maps, photos, and documents on the table. At the center of it all was the upcoming Marlowe Gala, an annual charity event hosted by one of the wealthiest families in New York. The Marlowes had a long, complicated history with the Blakes, sometimes allies, sometimes enemies. Richard believed that someone from the group behind the attack would attend the gala. That was where they planned to make their next move. Tom explained, "We're going to use Emily. They think she's fragile, that she's just a scared girl caught in the middle. But she's the one they should fear." Emily sat silently as Tom talked. She had never been part of anything like this, but the plan was clear. Make her visible, make her seem vulnerable, and let the enemy take the bait. When they did, the trap would close. Claire didn't like the plan. She wasn't afraid for herself. She was afraid for Emily. That night, the two of them sat together in the guest bedroom. Claire spoke for a long time, something she rarely did. "This isn't your world," she said. "You didn't choose this." Emily nodded. "But I'm already in it. I can't pretend I'm not." Claire looked away for a second, then added, "You're the only one I trust now." For a girl who had grown up surrounded by guards, power, and secrets, trust didn't come easily. That night, something changed between them. Emily helped Claire get ready for bed. Claire laid down, and for the first time in years, she reached out and turned off the lamp. The room went dark. There was no panic, no fear, just silence. She didn't do it because she felt brave. She did it because Emily was there, sitting beside her. That was enough. The next day, preparations for the gala moved quickly. Emily was fitted for a dress, briefed on her route through the ballroom, and given a short list of people to avoid or watch. Tom walked her through every possible scenario. If someone tried to talk to her alone, if someone followed her, if someone tried to drug her drink. Emily tried to absorb it all. She felt like she was acting in a role she hadn't auditioned for. Every detail had been planned. She would wear a tracking device in her earring, carry a hidden panic button, and follow a very specific schedule during the event. "They'll think you're exposed," Tom said, "but we'll be watching. The moment they try anything, it's over." Emily wasn't sure if she believed him, but she had to act like she did. The moment she stepped into that ballroom, she wouldn't just be bait. She'd be the spark that started something much bigger. That night, as the estate grew quiet, Emily checked on Claire one last time before heading to her own room. Claire was asleep, the light still off. Emily walked slowly down the hallway, her mind full of the plan, the risks, and the faces of the people who now depended on her. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't trained for this. But something inside her had changed. She couldn't go back to being invisible. She had seen too much, understood too much, and now others knew it too. She stepped into her room and sat by the window, watching the guards outside walk their patrol routes. Somewhere out there, the people who attacked the Blake mansion were still planning something. And soon they would show themselves again. But this time Emily would be ready. In the room down the hall, Claire slept peacefully in total darkness, for the first time in her life. Not because she was safe, but because Emily was near. Inside the grand ballroom of the luxurious Grand Oak Hotel, the annual Marlowe Gala was in full motion. The space was filled with over 500 guests, dressed in expensive suits and long, elegant gowns, talking, laughing, and clinking champagne glasses. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and an orchestra played softly in the background. Everything looked perfect, like a scene from a movie. But behind the polished surface, a hidden operation was unfolding. Emily stood near one of the central marble pillars, wearing a dark blue dress that flowed around her ankles. Her hair was neatly styled, and she wore silver earrings that sparkled under the lights. She looked like she belonged there, like a member of high society. But inside, she was anything but calm. Her hands trembled slightly, her eyes scanned the room. Every polite smile and every passing guest made her heart beat faster. She wasn't there to celebrate. She was there to catch someone. Across the room, Claire stood near the staircase on the upper level, leaning against the railing. She wore a black dress and held a glass of sparkling water in her hand. From her position, she could see almost the entire ballroom. Her eyes stayed locked on Emily. Even surrounded by luxury, Claire looked tense, proud but nervous. She knew how dangerous the night could become. She had grown up around people who smiled while hiding knives behind their backs. This event was no different. Somewhere in that crowd were the ones responsible for the attack at the mansion, the ones who wanted Claire dead. Down below, Emily moved calmly, pretending not to notice the small earpiece in her ear. From the other side of the room, Tom's voice came through. "Emily, heads up. Scar Jensen just entered through the east wing." At the same moment, Richard Blake stepped away from a conversation and placed his phone to his ear, pretending to take a call. Emily knew what she had to do. Her route had been rehearsed again and again. She crossed the room slowly, blending with the crowd, nodding politely to strangers. She walked past waiters carrying trays, past laughing couples, and made her way to the terrace doors. Outside, the air was cooler. The city lights stretched out in the distance. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Then the door opened behind her. Scar Jensen stepped onto the terrace. He was tall, with short dark hair and a calm, confident expression. He adjusted the cuff of his suit and looked at her. "Beautiful night, isn't it?" he said casually. Emily turned toward him and gave a polite smile. "Yes, very nice." He stepped closer, hands in his pockets, looking around like nothing was unusual. But Emily could feel it. This was it. The moment everything had been leading to. Scar thought she was alone. He thought she was defenseless. Scar took one more step forward, lowering his voice. "You're brave to come here, you know. Brave or stupid." His tone was different now, cold. Behind him, movement began near the edges of the ballroom. Claire noticed first. People she didn't recognize were suddenly heading toward the terrace. Men in formal suits, women in elegant gowns. But their eyes told the truth. They weren't guests. They were part of Scar's group. Traitors who had hidden for too long. Scar looked at Emily again. "This ends tonight." But before he could say another word, the doors behind him burst open. Men in suits pulled weapons from inside their jackets. Not Scar's people, Richard's. Members of the Blake family, undercover the entire night, hidden in plain sight. The trap had been set perfectly. Within seconds, chaos erupted. But it was controlled chaos. The fake guests from Scar's side were surrounded and taken down one by one. Emily didn't move. She just watched it unfold. Scar backed away, realizing what was happening. He looked around and saw that all of his support had vanished. The Blake men were everywhere. Some restrained his people, others blocked the exits. Tom entered from the ballroom with a calm but firm expression. Richard followed closely behind, his voice loud and clear. "Did you really think she was just a maid?" he said as he walked across the terrace. "You thought she would stand here alone?" Scar didn't answer, his jaw clenched. Richard kept walking. "You planned this for months. Thought you were smarter than everyone else." He stopped in front of Scar. "But you made one mistake. You underestimated her." Emily stood tall now, no longer shaking. Scar's hands were slowly raised in defeat. One by one, the last of his allies were pulled away. The Blake men worked quickly. It was done. No blood, No screams, just the sound of doors closing and the truth being revealed. Richard stepped closer, looking Scar directly in the eyes. "You came after my daughter," he said. "You came after my house, and you came after her." He nodded toward Emily. "Now, you'll answer for all of it." Scar didn't speak. He knew it was over. 2 guards grabbed his arms and led him away. The rest of the team continued to clear the area. Guests inside the ballroom were still unaware of what had really happened. The music still played, the drinks still flowed. It was all handled quietly. Claire rushed to the terrace and reached Emily. For the first time all night, she smiled. "You did it," she said. Emily looked around at the aftermath. It didn't feel like a victory, but it was. Richard stood beside them, proud. He looked at everyone gathered and said, "It's done. The truth is out." And just like that, the night returned to silence, but nothing would ever be the same again. Weeks had passed since the gala. The Blake mansion, once damaged during the attack, now stood fully restored. Workers had repaired every shattered window, replaced every ruined piece of furniture, and painted every scarred wall. But the biggest change wasn't the house. It was Claire. Her old room looked the same on the outside, but inside it felt different. She no longer kept the lights on all night. Her lamp stayed off. The curtains were open, letting in only the soft light of the moon. She didn't ask the guards to stand outside her door anymore. For the first time in years, she could fall asleep in complete darkness. She no longer feared what might come for her when the lights went out. And the reason for that change was simple. Emily. Claire now trusted that if anything ever came again, anything strange, deadly, or dangerous, Emily would be the one to face it. And that made her feel safe. Emily had changed too. She no longer wore the maid uniform. No one gave her orders. In fact, most of the staff now waited for her direction. The house guards, who used to ignore her, now greeted her with respect. She was no longer someone who blended into the background. She was now someone people watched when she walked by. One afternoon, Richard Blake called her into his study. As always, the room smelled of old books and cigar smoke. He didn't say much at first. Instead, he placed a small black box on the table in front of her. Emily opened it slowly. Inside was a gold ring. It was simple, but heavy, with the Blake family crest engraved into the surface. Richard looked at her and said, "You saved my daughter. You didn't run. You didn't hesitate. Now you're one of us." Emily didn't speak. She just stared at the ring, feeling the weight of what it meant. Later that night, Emily stood alone in the hallway outside Claire's room. She looked at the ring on her finger. The metal was cold, but it seemed to burn with meaning. She had always been someone who lived quietly, who followed rules, who stayed invisible. But now everything was different. She remembered what Richard had said before she left his office. "You left the ordinary world the moment you whispered, 'Don't do it.' That was the night you changed." Emily had never thought of herself as brave or important, but now the people around her treated her like both. She was no longer just the girl who worked in the background. She was someone others listened to, someone others feared. The hallway was quiet. Claire's room was dark. Emily turned and walked toward her own room, still thinking. She had stepped into something she didn't ask for, and now she had to decide what came next. The next morning, Emily sat in the garden alone. The air was cool, and birds moved between the trees. For a few minutes, everything felt normal, but she knew it wasn't. Nothing about her life was normal anymore. The ring on her finger caught the light, reminding her of what she was now a part of. She thought about her old life, the one before the Blake mansion, before secrets, before danger, a small apartment, quiet evenings, a job where no one even knew her name. Now she was part of a powerful family, a dangerous family, and that came with a price. Her choices weren't just hers anymore. Her safety, her actions, her future, they were all tied to the Blakes. Still, a question stayed in her mind. What if she wanted to leave? Go back to the life she knew? Was that still possible? Or had she crossed a line that couldn't be undone? Later that day, Emily found herself face to face with Richard once more. They stood in the same garden, surrounded by silence. Emily didn't waste time. "And if I want to leave?" she asked. Richard didn't look surprised. He just smiled, like he had already expected the question. "You left the life of a normal person the night you told my daughter not to turn off the light," he said calmly. "You can't go back to something that doesn't exist anymore." His words didn't sound like a threat. They sounded like the truth. Emily stayed quiet. She knew he was right. The moment she got involved, truly involved, everything changed. She had seen too much. She had survived what most wouldn't. Richard looked at her again. "You don't have to be afraid. You're not just a guest here. You're part of this now." Emily nodded slowly. She understood. She hadn't just been pulled in. She had chosen to stay. That evening, Claire joined Emily in the hallway as the staff began to turn off the mansion's lights for the night. The halls were quiet, but there was no fear in the air. Claire looked at her and smiled. "I never thought I could sleep in the dark," she said, "but now I can, because you're here." Emily didn't say anything, but she gave a small smile back. They walked together toward their rooms. Behind them, the lights went out one by one. Outside, the world kept turning. People walked the streets, cars passed by, and the city moved on. But inside the Blake mansion, everything had shifted. Emily was no longer invisible. She was known. She was respected. She was feared by those who had once ignored her. She wore the ring not just as a gift, but as a symbol. A new name had joined the Blake family, one that didn't come from blood, but from choice. Emily was one of them now. And that's a wrap. I'm so glad you stayed with us all the way to the end. Thank you so much for watching. Let us know in the comments what you thought of the story, and tell us which part you liked the most or the least. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. See you in the next one.